The night was darker than usual, the kind of black that seemed to stretch without end, where the horizon vanished and the stars burned sharp and cold. Caleb, the rancher, guided his horse along the dirt road with the ease of a man who had spent more nights under the sky than in the warmth of a roof. He wasn't looking for trouble, not tonight. His bones were weary from a long day in town, his heart even heavier than his body. He thought only of getting home, of pouring himself a glass of whiskey and sitting in the silence of the house that had been silent too long. But then came that sound. At first he tried to ignore it, convincing himself it was the wind whistling through the trees, maybe a fox caught in some brush. But then it came again, clearer this time, a thin, fragile cry that pierced straight through him. He stopped his horse, his gut twisting in that way it only did when something wasn't right. He had heard many cries in his life, men on battlefields, calves in labor, coyotes at night. But this one was different. This one was human. This one was a child. He swung down from the saddle, landing with a heavy thud, and pulled the flashlight from his saddlebag. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing across tree trunks and tall grass. His boots crunched on the frosted earth as he followed the sound, each step dragging him deeper into the woods. He told himself to be cautious. Trouble could wear many faces, but his chest tightened with something stronger than suspicion. The cry wasn't far now. It was broken, as though the one making it no longer believed anyone would come, and then he saw them, two figures, small against the looming trees. The first was a girl no older than 6, huddled against the roots of an oak, her hair tangled into messy knots, cheeks streaked with tears and dirt. Beside her, standing like a frail shield, was a teenage girl. She clutched the little one's hand tightly, her thin body trembling, but her chin raised as if daring the darkness to challenge her. Their clothes were thin, unsuited for the cold, and their shoes were scuffed, one nearly falling apart at the sole. The older one's eyes snapped toward Caleb's flashlight, wide and frightened but sharp with defiance. "We're not causing trouble," she said, her voice firm despite its tremble. We just need somewhere safe." Caleb lowered the beam a little, not wanting to blind them, though his heart was already pounding. Strays had wandered onto his land before, but never like this. Never two children who looked like they'd been dropped from one hell straight into the jaws of another. He swallowed hard, trying to mask the emotion that rose in his throat. "You're out here alone?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. The older girl nodded once, quickly. "It's just us." The younger one lifted her head then, her small voice cracking raw from too much crying. "Mister, please." Her words faltered, her lips trembling, and she looked to her sister before whispering the sentence that would brand itself into Caleb's soul. If you have to take one of us, can you take her instead of me?" The world seemed to stop. Caleb felt the air punch out of his lungs, the earth tilt beneath his boots. His mouth went dry, no words forming, no answer he could give. The older girl gasped softly, horror etched across her face, and she pulled her sister close, pressing her against her chest as though she could erase the words from existence. "Don't say that." "Anna," she whispered fiercely, her voice cracking with a pain too old for her young years. But Caleb had already heard it. He couldn't unhear it. A child offering herself or her sister like a lamb to a butcher. He knew then, without a doubt, that these girls had been running from something monstrous, something that had carved survival into their bones at too young an age. He cleared his throat, rough and dry, and gestured toward his horse. "Ranch isn't far," he said. "You can walk behind." The older girl hesitated, suspicion flashing across her eyes, but the little one tugged her hand and nodded eagerly. They rose, stumbling from exhaustion, and followed him out of the woods. The walk back was silent, only the crunch of boots and the sound of the horse's hooves filling the cold night air. Caleb glanced back every so often. The little one's steps were small and shaky, but she held on to her sister like an anchor. The older one never took her eyes off Caleb's back, wary, as if one wrong move would send her running. When the warm glow of the ranch house finally came into sight, Caleb felt a strange pull in his chest. That light had stood for years without meaning, only illuminating empty rooms and silent nights. Tonight For the first time in too long, it meant something else. It meant safety, for them, at least for now. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the faint smell of wood smoke. Caleb moved quickly, lighting the fire until the logs crackled and cast orange across the room. He fetched 2 blankets, thick and worn, and wrapped them around the girl's shoulders. They sank into the couch, huddling together, the little one's head against her sister's arm. He poured milk into tin cups, warmed it on the stove, and handed it to them. The older girl accepted it with quiet thanks, her eyes still cautious, while the little one drank eagerly, milk running down her chin. Caleb sat across from them, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, watching without a word. He wanted to ask them everything, where they'd come from, who they were running from, why such young souls carried eyes so old, but he kept silent. He'd learned long ago that sometimes silence was the kindest thing you could give. As the fire popped, the girl's shoulders relaxed, just slightly. The little one's eyelids drooped, her head falling heavy against her sister. The older girl smoothed her hair back, her hands trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes stayed open, watchful. Later, when Caleb retreated to his room, he closed the door softly and leaned back against it, the weight of the night pressing down on him. His chest ached in a way he hadn't felt in years. Not since he'd buried his wife under the oak on the hill, not since he'd lowered into the ground the child they never got to raise. That pain had hardened him, hollowed him, made him live like a man already half in the grave. But tonight, something stirred. Those 2 girls, broken and bruised by life, had been set down on his path. And that question, that awful, unshakable question, still rang in his ears. Can you take her instead of me? He had no answer for it then. He wasn't sure he ever would. But he knew one thing with a certainty that burned. They weren't going back out into that cold. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not while he was breathing. The morning came quietly, the sun spilling over the hills in soft gold, but the air inside the ranch carried a tension Caleb could feel in his bones. He rose before dawn, as he always did, feeding the horses and hauling hay. Yet his mind wasn't on the rhythm of chores. It was back in the house, on the 2 girls who had slept under his roof for the first time. When he stepped into the kitchen, wiping sweat and dust from his brow, he found them at the table. The older one, Lily, was sitting stiff-backed, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of milk, while little Anna sat beside her, swinging her legs and smiling shyly when she saw him. For a moment, it almost looked like a family scene, one he hadn't had in years. They ate slowly, as though not sure if the food was really theirs to take. Caleb noticed how Lily's eyes flickered toward the window every few minutes, scanning the road, the horizon, anywhere trouble might appear. She didn't trust peace. He leaned against the counter, studying her carefully. "You 2 planning on running?" he asked at last, his voice steady, though not unkind. Lily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her lips parted, but no words came. Anna looked up at her sister, then back at Caleb, her small voice carrying a truth Lily wasn't ready to say. "He'll find us if we go back," Anna whispered. Her words hung in the air, fragile but heavy, like glass ready to shatter. Caleb crouched near the table, his weathered hands resting on his knees, eyes level with theirs. "Who?" he asked quietly. Lily's knuckles turned white as she set down her fork. Her jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with fear and defiance all at once. "It doesn't matter," she said finally, her voice breaking under the strain. "You've already done enough letting us stay. We'll leave before dark." But Anna shook her head fiercely, her eyes filling with tears. She reached for Caleb's sleeve, clutching it with the desperation only a child could carry. "Please don't make us go," she begged, her voice trembling raw, and full of the same plea she'd spoken the night before in the woods. Caleb felt something inside him snap, not in anger, but in defiance against the world that had forced such words from a little girl's lips. He stood slowly, his height casting a long shadow across the table, and brought his hand down with a heavy thud. The plates rattled and both girls flinched. But when Caleb spoke, his voice was iron. "You're not leaving." Silence fell over the room, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire. Lily stared at him, Her lips parted in shock, and Anna's tears spilled freely as she climbed into her sister's lap, clutching her tightly. Caleb turned away, his jaw set. He wasn't sure why he'd said it, only that he meant every word. They weren't going anywhere. The days passed and slowly life shifted.
Caleb,